But now that we're essentially out of lockdown and getting kind of used to this new normal, it might be a time to look at the future, because there's no denying that coronavirus and lockdown have completely changed the way we do a lot of things, whether that's working from home, wearing a face mask out the house, or just keeping in contact with family via video chat. So what impact are these kind of things going to have in the long term? Well, this is where futurologist Mel Fletcher comes in, and Mal is here now. Thank you for coming on the show, Mal.
Pleasure, Adam. Nice to speak to you.
So you've kind of got a bit of a warning for us, haven't you, about overuse of social media and virtual socialising at the moment, haven't you?
Yeah, I do have a little bit, because our research shows that in this sort of post-lockdown pre-vaccine phase, Adam, people have fewer filters on their self-expression because we're not in a physical space with other people as often as we might normally be. And that can, if we're not careful, make it easier for us to react in hyper-emotional ways. So I'm very grateful, as I'm sure the listeners are, for things like social media at this particular time. But I think we do see a heightening of what we've come to call the hot response culture, where we're adding heat but not light on important issues. You know, the spontaneity of social media, some cases the anonymity of social media, encourages a social conversation that's about overreaction, where we favour a hot response rather than a calm and reasoned one. So we need to exercise a little care.
So it's that kind of moment where somebody might make a comment to somebody else, and because it's social media and they're not together and they're obviously far apart, they're not there in person, it might have been a comment that actually, if you were face-to-face, you might have thought it, but you wouldn't have said it.
Yeah, in some cases we do that with people we don't even know. A study showed a couple of years ago, way before COVID, that here in Britain, a large percentage of people admitted, look, I've insulted at least one person in the last month that I don't even know on social media. So, you know, that's a lot of people getting insulted by people they don't know. So, yeah, I think it's important to remember that most conversations on social media are not private. You know, we need to exercise a much higher degree of caution than we would in a phone call. And, I dare say, we need to engage the brain before the thumbs.
Well, and another thing is we're leaving a digital footprint behind us for the rest of our lives, and even when we're gone. So, you know, in 100 years' time, whereas at the moment we're going to libraries to read about our ancestors, people would just be able to log on to our Facebook and see what we were up to.
Yeah, exactly right. And what people are doing today is what newspaper editors learned to do 200 years ago, to use headlines to grab people's attention. And now millions of people on an individual basis are doing that very thing, pumping out in the shortest space these very eye-catching headlines to increase their likes and followers in some cases. And in the end, really, the ideas that have the most influence are those that are carried forward with a certain degree of reason and compassion, I think.
So what can we do about this to stop it having a permanent impact moving forwards?
Oh, look, I think on a practical level, it's simple things, really. I think circumstances change. Human nature doesn't change all that much. So courtesy is central to persuasion. Human beings are much more than the sum total of what they say on, say, social media. People are complex. They're sometimes developing their ideas as they put them out. And even if we disagree strongly with their views, they still have an essential humanity that's worthy of respect. And I do think that hot response culture I just mentioned is never helpful, because it simply turns up the heat on an issue but doesn't shed any light. And these are very often important questions we're dealing with. So moderating the tone a little can actually help us suggest other new ways of seeing things.
Yeah, I totally agree. If I'm annoyed at something that I see on social media, I'll read it and then I'll think to myself, don't comment, go back to it in half an hour and then see how you feel about it. And I find that my responses are always a lot nicer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it takes time just to calm down, doesn't it, and get the thought processes working properly. Some research was done a few years ago that suggested that when we do overreact, what we're doing is putting the fight and flight brain ahead of the more reasoned parts of the brain and almost turning off the latter completely, which is never a good thing, really.
So how about life in general then moving forwards? How is that going to change, do you think, because of all the recent pandemic?
Well, that's a $64,000 question, Adam. But I think with all the research we've been doing, it is obvious to anybody that we're not going to see a return to what we used to call normal for pretty much at least the next 6 to 8 months, and longer in some sectors of society and life. But there are some positives. I think, for example, in healthcare, we'll see a lot higher acceptance of digital medicine through video consultations and that. That's important when we're talking about moving towards the acceptance of artificial neural networks, or if you like, artificial intelligence networks, to start to augment but not replace doctors. In the process, professional medicine might actually benefit because doctors might have more time to be therapeutic, to spend time on the more people-centered areas of medicine, the empathy aspects, because a robot, by definition, can't show empathy. It's the one thing a human being has over a machine. So there are positives there. There are positives in education and the economy and other areas as well.
Absolutely. Positives with the environment maybe moving forward. Positives with potentially mental health, I suppose, we can take out of this, because people being allowed to work at home maybe when they didn't beforehand, and, you know, it might actually improve lives going forward. So how horrible and disastrous this pandemic might have been, there's always a tiny, tiny bit of positivity to come out of it, I'm guessing.
Yeah, look, taking that issue of mental health, I think that's one of the areas where education will change almost immediately. We will see a higher emphasis on teaching even young children mental health skills. And we don't yet know how deeply this whole thing has affected mental health across the society. But what we do know is children will have been affected directly and indirectly. And we do need to see schools, I think, at the very least, providing some basic training in kinds of self-administered skills available to people through things like cognitive behavioural therapy, and that could be a very big positive.
This is all so interesting. I mean, I could sit and talk to you for hours about all this. If anyone else is really keen to know more, is there anywhere that people can go to find out a bit more about what you do?
Yeah, well, our main website is very simple, 2030 plus, 2030 followed by the word PLUS.com. And I'm on all the social medias, and that's Mal Fletcher, not M-E-L, but M-A-L.
Ah, of course. Yes, you've got to spell it right, otherwise we'll never find you. Mal Fletcher, futurologist, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about that this afternoon.